Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted Podcast. We are Jeff and Terra Mattson, a husband and wife team who is shrinking the integrity gap in our own lives and helping others do the same. I'm a leadership and organizational development coach, and Terra is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
We believe that if you have a following, you are a leader, and how you lead matters. Whether you are leading in the home, work, or community, we are bringing you biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom to help you in every relationship that matters most to you. None of us do this perfectly, but we are leaning into the reality of our humanity and profound wisdom of grace. Well, as promised, I am sharing a little bit about my own journey with an eating disorder called bulimia. Now, it's kind of awkward to sit in a studio all by myself and just talk away at a microphone. So I'm imagining many of you, either clients or friends, or maybe I'm standing on a stage and I'm talking to an audience so that I can have faces. Or actually, why don't you just pull up a chair and let's have a cup of coffee? And maybe that's more of what I'll envision as I tell you a little bit about my own journey. And then maybe be able to kind of add my clinical hat of what I've understood about my journey and the journey of many that I have walked alongside, and what I've infused particularly into the Courageous Girls curriculum in light of the struggle with body image issues and food and addiction and compulsive behaviors. All right, so let me just start at the beginning. I was born, no, I'm kidding. Truth be told, though, I was born into a wonderful family, a small family, a mom and a dad, and I'm the oldest, and I've got a younger sister, and about 5 years younger. My parents were young parents. They went to high school and were high school sweethearts, got married, and had a family right away. And then waited a little while because I hear that I was a little bit of a terror as a little girl. And so they needed to wait before they had my sister. All that to say, did a lot of kind of typical things, grew up in the Southwest in Arizona. I'm a sun baby, love the heat. Still to this day, I'm a lizard. And in high school, we made a significant move up to the Northwest of where I finished high school up in Washington. Drastic cultural changes between Arizona and where I lived in Washington. Just the weather alone was drastic. I remember the first year I moved to Washington was one of their record years of the longest days of rain. Yes, lucky me. And I had just come during the summertime. I had left the 100+ degree weather and came to, I think it was like 75 degrees, which is like winter for Arizonans. And so it was terrible. But all that to say, in the end, God's hand was on that move, and a lot of where my own growth in my walk with God really took off in those years. So I set the stage because I just want you to understand that a lot of the time with eating disorders or the struggle that happens on an internal basis with any sort of compulsive behaviors, there's often a wide divide between what people see and what's happening internally. And so I was actually quite a bit of an achiever, oldest child, do-gooder. I wanted to obey. Apparently, I got all my rebellion out in the first 5 years of my life. And then from that point, I became a rule follower and really wanted to please my teachers and my parents and wanted to be a good kid. That was kind of the premise for me. And I did really well. So I started in Arizona, was successful, made student body, was on varsity volleyball, was able to do all kinds of things. And then we picked up and we moved across the country, and I started at a new high school, and I started over and I joined and made varsity volleyball. I ended up getting on student council. I did well in school, made good group of friends, and even met a group of Christians within my public high school, very large public high school. So again, was able on the outside to perform, But I think along the years of transitioning in high school, having to start over a couple times, I did really well with meeting new people, but internally I felt very much a disconnect between being popular and feeling known. People who really took time to know me. And as long as I was able to perform or to be happy all the time or an encourager, I was really good at caring for others. But I had a really hard time letting people know what was really on inside me. And to be honest, I don't even know if I knew at the time. But I remember at some point in that sophomore year of high school when I moved, that I think the intensity of my emotions was so strong. I now know that I'm wired as a high merchant innovator, which if you've listened to any of our core values index podcasts or done any training with us or have even heard of it, you understand that merchants are high feelers. What they do is they absorb their world around them emotionally. It makes me a really good empathetic person. I'm able to tune in. Merchants are really fun as well. So I was able to, and they love people. And so I was collecting people everywhere I went. And I love to connect and to listen and to hear and to process with people even way before I became a counselor. But I was picking up emotions everywhere I went, not only my own emotions, my family's emotions, but everybody around me and their emotions. And I didn't know how to truly process those emotions. I didn't know what emotions were okay to feel and which ones weren't. And somewhere in my discipleship, I somehow picked up on the idea. Nobody overtly taught me, but again, it's sometimes in this performance-based Christianity, there's a sense of I have to always have joy. I need to have peace. And if I don't, then it means I'm not trusting God. And I remember looking to certain believers and as models and people that I wanted to follow after. And I didn't ever see them talking about the hard emotions or the hard things of life. And so I, as a deep feeler and a deep thinker, was constantly wrestling with the struggles that were going on in my friendships and in my life and didn't really know where to go or what to talk about. And oftentimes that's when people will come into my office, right? As a counselor, we now know to do that. But in my day, that wasn't as common. People didn't go to counseling. And I just didn't really know who to talk to or what to process. So all that to say, lots of emotions. And I remember one day pushing my limits in terms of overeating. I loved exercise. I'm an athlete even to this day. I love exercise. I know I'm weird. But at the time I would work out, right, for my sports. And then I would go and I would get to eat. And my family made yummy food. And I was really passionate about food. And I remember that one day I was in my living room and I had overeaten pizza. And for most teenage girls, their bodies are changing pretty drastically. And I was noticing a lot of shifting happening from living in a different culture that didn't have sunshine very much. Even though I was very active culturally, we were less active in Washington than in Arizona, and the dreariness of the winter. And I just felt a heaviness. And I can't tell you why exactly. But I remember going into the bathroom and I remember purging the pizza. And though I hated every moment of it, nobody really likes to vomit, but I hated every moment of it, there was a release on the other side. And I remember thinking I'll never do that again, but that was just a one-time thing. And I think I had even learned that people had binged and purged through something at school maybe, or a movie. But I never imagined cognitively, I knew it was wrong. And yet there's that compulsion to want to get rid of that overstuffed feeling. And that was the first, and it wasn't the last. That behavior began to become an addiction. I would continually struggle with knowing my limits when it came to eating, and I would use exercise and purging to release that intense feeling. Later on, what I realized was that I actually was responding to the intensity of what I was feeling emotionally. And I didn't have the same skills or that I do today. And then I learned along the way of how to process my inner life and my inner feelings. I connected it to my body because I was really frustrated that my body wasn't looking the way that I wanted. And often teen girls and boys are put upon with pressure culturally from everything from a certain look, but also just sexually. We have an overt sexual culture that just objectifies a lot of who we are on the outward appearance. And so the pressure is pretty heavy, right, for all of us to look away a certain way or to feel a certain way. But really, what I'm trying to say is that the root was less about the cultural dynamics and more about my emotional health and what I was struggling with. And I found a clever coping strategy that worked at the time. I mean, if I had found heroin, if I had found pot, if I had found all these other things, they would have done alcohol. It would have done the same thing. It would have released that tension of all the emotional baggage that I was holding and didn't have the tools of where to go. Now I journaled, I prayed, I read my Bible, I did all these things. The one thing I didn't do was talk to people. I didn't know that could be as powerful as it is. And now I understand with the neuroscience and what we understand about human connection through Dr. Siegel's work and Kurt Thompson and all of these people who have helped connect the dots between what happens in our brains and our relationships, that we're wounded in relationships, we're healed in relationships, that God designed it that way. And so that was really a missing link for me. And then in my own DNA, I think I have a pull towards compulsive behaviors. I tend to want to go all out and then maybe push past a limit. I do that in lots of areas of my life that I've had to kind of work beyond. So it wasn't just eating and exercise and purging, but it would be overworking my body, pushing myself too far physically as an athlete, or pushing myself too far with taking way too much on as an achiever. And to this day, I have to work at being aware of my limits, in tune with my emotions, what's my body needing and feeling. So that's kind of the overarching piece for what happened in my journey. And though I didn't end up in any treatment facility, and that was by God's grace, that in my journey, I struggled for many years, but it wasn't until I actually started telling people. So I told a friend, and then I told, at the time, my boyfriend, Jeff Mattson, who's now my husband. And he was the first one that said, you actually might want to get some help for that. That's actually pretty serious. And I actually had minimized it, like most of us do with our behaviors of trying to cope, our unhealthy coping strategies. We minimize it and we think, I got this under control. It's no big deal. It's not hurting anyone. I'm just using it for the time being. I can control it. Those are all lies. And there's a lot of reasons because our brains actually really change and shift according to what we're doing. Our behaviors impact our brains. And so over years of practicing this binging and purging, it became a fixation. And I remember in my early years in college, it became a point where that's all I thought about all day long was how I was looking, what I was wearing, what I was eating, when would I exercise, could I get my exercise in? And it was all consuming that it left me thinking all about me. I was hurting and I was struggling and I felt really lacking integrity. We'll just say we talk a lot about shrinking the integrity gap between who we say we are and how we actually live. Here I was, a leader on campus in Christian. I was in the Christian formation and psychology degrees. I just felt like a fraud, right? Because in my dorm room as a leader, I was a peer advisor. I'm struggling with this in my own room. And I remember looking in the mirror every day before I left, and I would just hear that voice of, you are ugly. Nobody ever told me I was ugly. And so sometimes when we struggle with eating disorders in the context, it really isn't coming from a place of because somebody told us that we were too fat. That is the case in many people's stories that they've heard, maybe not towards them, but they've been in cultures where parents are fixated on physical appearance, or they hear or on what they eat, or overly fixated on talking about people on the TV or in media and making comments that can really transfer to children and to teens and make them, they're egocentric. We think everything's about us when we're in those stages of our lives. So that is a danger. But for me, nobody ever told me I was ugly. It was really a lie that came from that inward place that I was battling a voice of my own head. And it was that sophomore year that I ended up talking with a counselor, talking with a mentor, and I ended up telling my parents were all key pieces to me finding freedom. Now, did I find healing all in one moment? No, but it was a starting place. And what I remember is that mentor of mine, she challenged me to spend time in God's Word every day reading Psalm 139. Psalm 139 says, I'm fearfully, verse 14, I'm fearfully and I'm wonderfully made, and I know that full well. I'm fearfully and I'm wonderfully made, and I know that full well. Well, I took her challenge and I read that passage every day for 90 days. And I even wrote verse 14 on my mirror. And I remember the day, I can picture it in my mind when I got up from bed and I went to the mirror, and I have these compulsive behaviors where I would measure my shoulder to see, did I gain any weight or lose any weight overnight? And if you've ever struggled with anything related to body image issues, you understand what I'm saying, or even with compulsive behaviors. It doesn't make sense, but I would measure my collarbone and my collar. And I remember getting up that morning to do my routine, and I stopped and I saw the scripture. I'm fearfully and I'm wonderfully made, and I know that full well. And it, for the first time, when I looked in the mirror in a long, long time, I saw someone who was beautiful. Nothing had changed about my body, my outer appearance. And at that time, it was really between me and the Lord an intimate moment where He said, trust me with what I say about you. Trust me. And let me show you what I've designed you for. That who you are, how you're made, everything from the color of your hair to the size of your body to your personality, everything is made on purpose. And you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And I want you to know that full well. And I remember that moment being kind of a turning point for me, where it became less about me in the mirror and looking at the mirror. And all of a sudden, I started to see everyone else around me. Now, again, you got to remember, I was a performer and a pleaser and a leader and was able to make everyone feel valuable and seen, but I was divided. And so what I was giving to other people, I was giving tenfold back energy towards myself and conscious about it, overthinking, did I say the right thing? Did I do the right thing? And there was a freedom that was happening both from me physically in that eating disorder, also to spiritually, emotionally, and my inner integrity of being able to say, I genuinely don't want to think about myself anymore in this same way. And I stopped binging and purging and using exercise. And I actually gave up my alarm clock for a year. It's such a funny part of my story, but it was one of those first early steps of obedience where God asks you to do something that maybe doesn't make sense to others, but because of your story, it makes sense to you. And so I gave up my alarm clock. I was always wanting to make sure I woke up on time to get my exercise in, to make sure that I had time to get ready. And I would also try to get my quiet time in, right? But it became such a rigid routine that I wasn't living in freedom. And so I gave up my alarm clock and I said, God, if you want me to exercise, then you will give me time. And I remember having exams first thing in the morning, and I would be afraid that I wouldn't wake up on time. But it grew this trust that I could lean into God, that He even took care of the time I would wake up and how much time I would have. And if I didn't have time to exercise and have a quiet time, I would choose my quiet time over exercising. And it was a part of my discipline of letting go of that urge to have to go exercise in order to feel better and to make myself have a certain body size. That was a process. That was an early process. And the combination of learning to identify my emotions, to name them. I remember the first time I really felt disappointed and allowed myself to say it out loud in a relationship, and that person to be able to receive it and not reject me. I remember the first time I was able to talk about the grief and sadness that I held deep inside. And today I know that I'm such a deep feeler that I have to have regular rhythms in my life to really grieve and to cry and to get angry. So Jeff and I laugh that often when we're teaching about communication and regulating your emotions, I have to have access to things where I can punch and kick. And so I do kickboxing, or I've had punching bags, but I do more assertive exercise now, not because I want to be a certain size, but as a release for some of the emotions that I feel that are more intense. You need intense emotions. You got to match it with intensity to release it. And then also using other exercises that are more calming and grounding to be able to slow down and to let my body to feel the joy of life. Eating disorders and body image issues, they are very real, and sometimes people live with them for decades. And some of you are parents of kids and children who you're concerned about, and you're wondering if this is going to be an issue. Others, it's your struggle. It's a daily battle for you. Or maybe it's not eating and body image issues, but it's other compulsive behaviors. It's shopping. It's workaholism. It's your phone. It's social media. It's pornography. It's those compulsive behaviors are often linked to our inability to have emotional, intimate relationships with other people. And if we can't do that with other people, it's really hard to have that with God. Now, I will say that it is hard to start just out of the gate with trusting people if you've not trusted them for a long time. And so that's where counseling has been a place where I felt called to create a space for others to practice, to be able to have a place where you get to really start to understand what's going on in your inner life, and then being able to transfer that out into your real life relationships. And most of the time, if you've heard anything about our story, most of the time my clients have been high capacity leaders where people would be really surprised about what's happening on those deeper inner world places. So I know that very well, of what it's like to split, what it's like to live a divided life, and what it's like to bring all of who I am and have to start slow and steady. And I would say it took about 10 years to really clean out the compulsive thinking patterns. So maybe I didn't do the behaviors anymore, but it was the thinking patterns around food. I released what's good food, bad food. In a previous episode with Dr. Rona, we talk about those who have food addiction, and that some foods can be like drugs with certain biology and certain DNA. For me, it was less about food as a drug and more about a way to kind of, if you think about being honest and expressing your emotions through your mouth, I was basically shoving them down as I was binging. And so it's taking food, and I used to joke, I still joke about it, but if you have heard me, I joke about Ben and Jerry's being some of my best friends throughout my growing teen years. And it's because Ben and Jerry Chunky Monkey ice cream was my main go-to when I was feeling alone or struggling and I didn't want to talk to anybody. I remember going down to the store at my alma mater, and I would get my own little Ben and Jerry's pint, and it would be Ben, Jerry, and me, and I would process. And so that joke about women, getting their ice cream and sulking in their ice cream is so true. But for me, it was part of my struggle, my eating disorder. And so I rarely will get a Ben and Jerry's, but I have to think about why am I going to food? So let me just end with a few practical tips that maybe would help you if you're in this area, if you know someone, and it just to kind of normalize it a bit. I often will do what's called in our counseling world mindfulness eating, but really it's this idea of slowing down and thinking, what am I hungry for? Not just grabbing food because I'm bored or I'm lonely or I'm sad or I'm angry. And there are triggers, so understanding your triggers. So one of the triggers for me was after a really intense day of sitting with clients in trauma and working through intense work, I would feel all those feelings, not only my own, but my clients' feelings. And that is a trigger for me when I'm overloaded with emotions. And so after my long day with clients, I would drive by a restaurant, a fast food restaurant that has really crispy tacos. And that would be a pull for me, would be wanting to just grab those tacos and to eat those instead of to actually process. So practicing being aware of those triggers, I would drive by that place and I made it past. And now I'm able to go home and I would spend some time journaling, maybe take some time slowing down and doing some self-care, and then engaging in some conversations about my own feelings for the day, maybe with my husband or with a friend. But being able to always make sure that I was tuning to my emotions was a healthier way. Did I sometimes stop and get the taco? Oh, yeah, I did. But there's no shame in that piece because there's nothing wrong with eating a taco. It's just knowing the why. It's just knowing the why. And knowing, am I trying to numb out what's going on in my inner world? Or am I paying attention to that? The other piece is when I eat, the mindfulness part is to slow down and enjoy my five senses, to take in the food and to take in the flavors rather than just downing it all. What that does is it helps me stay connected to my gut and my stomach and making sure, am I full? What are those limits? Do I even know? And I think I spent the first 2 decades of my life not knowing when I was full and when I was not. So one of the things that we teach in Courageous Girls when girls are young is learning to listen to your body. Am I hungry? What am I hungry for? Do I want protein? Am I wanting milk, dairy? Am I wanting vegetables? Am I wanting a cookie? Well, great, go for a cookie, but make sure that it's because you're hungry for a cookie, and then only enjoy a cookie up until when you hit that limit. So 1 cookie, 2 cookie, not 20 cookies. And it's removing the good, bad labels of food. Now, if you've got allergies and could die from some food, or you've got the food addiction piece, then yes, there are really important pieces for you to follow. But I'm talking in general for the most of us to be able to enjoy, to taste and see that the Lord is good and to enjoy food. And the other thing that I do is also just making sure that exercise for me isn't about how I look, but really using it as a means of helping to process emotions and to regulate. So I've talked in other episodes and in other places about my anxiety, and that was another piece that I didn't understand growing up, that I struggled with anxiety. I just stuffed it deep inside, and I smiled big and I performed. But really, that anxiety was driving a compulsive behavior. And so now, understanding what anxiety is, seeing it as a friend, and taking good care of her, and making sure that I have a lot of options. Exercise is just one of those options. Again, as long as I can exercise, I will exercise. You get all kinds of great benefits from it, but it isn't so that I will be a certain size. And the final thing is I'm continually making sure that how I think and I talk about my body, not only for myself and for my own emotional health and my own mindset, but for the modeling to my daughters and to other women. And Jeff and I are in agreement about how we just talk about our bodies. We talk about them, thanking them. I know it sounds so cheesy, but to be thankful that I'm strong, that I have big legs. I mean, I was teased for being called tree trunk legs because I have really strong legs. Now, they're not bigger than any, kind of the average size, but for most of us women, we pick apart our bodies, and a lot of men do that too, where we think something's too big, too small, whatever, and we're doing a comparison game. And instead, I want to just appreciate what I have, appreciate what my body can do for me and how it can propel me to be able to carry out God's purpose in my life. And so I'm grateful. I have really old, beat up knees. They're like double the age that I am because of my genes. So I have to take good care of these knees. But I'm thankful I have strong legs that I can keep, and then I'm able to, carry and help Jeff on the property because I'm strong. When I was younger, I was embarrassed that I was stronger. I thought I was more built like a guy. And now I can appreciate that. And so I speak about that in a good way so that my daughters can see that all such shapes and sizes are beautiful and have purpose. And who are we to say that, one size of thigh is better than another? And so I would challenge us as listeners start with ourselves. How do we think about our own bodies? What are we fixating on? If we're focused on having health and wanting to make sure we're being good stewards of our bodies, that's a really healthy mind frame. But if it's all consuming, like what I was struggling with in early college, where it was all about everything was about me, and I couldn't see people because I was always thinking about me. Yes, that is a form of narcissism, but it was an illness. It was a sickness of which I was seeing a lens, of which I was seeing ministry and who I was. And it wasn't God's best. It wasn't freedom. It can be hard, so have compassion for you, but to know that you do not have to stay here. And in my journey, I've been 20 years without the deep entrenched battle of bulimia and body image issues. And yes, I'm a normal female, and I once in a while wake up thinking, I wish I could change this about myself, but I'm honestly trying to reframe in that moment. I'm fearfully and I'm wonderfully made, and I know that full well. Thank you, God, for this body. Thank you for the ability to do what I can do today. And knowing that I take none of it for granted, because it doesn't mean that tomorrow I will have the ability, right? We know that things happen in life all throughout, and many of you listening have all kinds of disabilities and inabilities to be able to move your bodies in certain ways. So whatever you can do, find a way to move in all the ways that you love. Make it something that's joyful. Don't make it something that's rigid. Be able to go to the Lord and ask Him to be the one who schedules your days and to help you if you are a little bit more on the rigid side. If you're not disciplined at all, ask Him to help you to find joy in maybe moving your body once or twice a week. If you can get up to 3 or 4, that's amazing. And when it comes to food, having food in its right relationship, to know that it's good and it's to be enjoyed, but it's just creation. It's not meant to be the God of our lives. And when it comes to our bodies, to appreciate that they are a temple created with a vessel of being able to be God's people in the world, a light for His kingdom. And it helps us when we feel good in our bodies, and we can take our minds off of ourselves and be able to see others around us, to love them well, knowing that we're already loved. And I don't have to prove that to you or to anyone else. So that was a bit of my story. I'm sure you've got questions. Feel free to ask them. I have no problems answering. There are more serious eating disorders and struggles that I didn't talk about today. And I will say that it is appropriate to get treatment. It can be about life or death. It is often connected to our inability to process emotions. And in most cases, if not many, it's related to some trauma and abuse that's maybe even happened towards the body. But abuses of all kinds: emotional, physical, sexual, psychological. And it doesn't mean that it's something that you can do on your own. So I do want to say that whether you're working with a counselor, you need to go to treatment, or this is more just something you need to confess and talk to a friend and a mentor about. Start your journey and have compassion for friends around you that do struggle, for your kids. Speak life to them. Talk about your bodies in good ways. And I just want to close in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for these physical vessels, that we might not separate from them, but to care for them. To know that they aren't eternal, but they are part of your design. They're good, and that they are part of what you created so that we can carry out the good works you had prepared for us before we were born. I thank you for the journey that I did have, and I understand that compulsive place. I have a deep empathy for it. I pray for those that are listening that have any sort of hidden compulsions, or are walking with those that do, that they build compassion to recognize that it's often not the actual issue, isn't the weed, but there are roots below that are pulling and are feeding those weeds, that we would pay attention to those, that your grace would be made abundant in our lives, and that in facing our stories and feeling it to heal it, that in that we would be shrinking our integrity gaps. And I'm so grateful, Lord, for who you are and the power of your love in our lives, that we can do this as we walk with one another. And may we go in peace in Jesus' name. Amen.
This podcast is powered by Living Wholehearted, Courageous Girls, and the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Thank you for joining us in this critical movement of shrinking our integrity gaps between what we preach and live.